God bless. This is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, or NFL ESP, found on the web at NFL-ESP.com. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. For more information on me and this program, you may go to markanthonydebello.com and click on the Sports tab. Today is January the 27th. It's Wednesday. We've just completed the conference round of the National Football League playoffs. And on February 7th, the NFL will be playing its 50th Super Bowl, a monumental occasion for these gladiators of the gridiron. This program will be 1/2 hour long. Again, I try to divide it into 3 segments, covering not only the NFL from our unique analytical data perspective that NFL ESP affords, but also for those of you who have an interest in all things Las Vegas, and then lastly for those of you who have an interest in fantasy football. Again, we concentrate on using the 4 aspects of NFL ESP, which are the spiritual, motivational, X's and O's, which is typically play design but can even be stadium design, and then lastly our exclusive use of the most unique, accurate, undervalued, and misunderstood number in all of pro sports and even collegiate sports, the power spread. Again, our NFL ESP data has been proven to increase a team's win production by at least 10 to 15% minimum in the National Football League or in the pro sports, and up to 25% minimum or more in collegiate sports. Again, we focus on our 4 Ps of NFL ESP or any of the ESP products, even NBA ESP or MLB or MLS or even NHL, and that is power, prophecy, prediction, and production. And again, when we talk about increasing a team's production, it could be everything from score on the field to wins and losses to financial in an organization, because we know pro sports is basically sport, business, and entertainment. I'm blessed and fortunate to have experience and data as it relates to all 3 aspects of a pro team. And if you ever hear me say the word we, I certainly speak on behalf of God and I, because God is a God of math who uses math as a language, as a way of communication. And his laws, not unlike his commandments, are immutable and unchangeable, just as he is. And some of this data, some of these principles and insights and philosophies you'll hear me relay are mathematic principles in sports theory or laws that, again, are immutable and unchangeable. Yet so many people, especially fans, but surely the media, and then even more importantly, and more meaningful to me is the head coaches, or even the coaching staff, or the executives, or even ownership, because I respect the owners, especially in the NFL. There's only 32 of them. Think of the percentages. How many people wished or wanted to own a National Football League team? And of this planet of 8 billion people, let's say only 32 own a team. So I give them all the respect. They have to be great at business, obviously, first, but many are blessed with a great sports mind. So I try now to deal, and we at NFL ESP, God and I, or I who, tries to share this program, whether it's from a media perspective or our consultation service to owners, because they are the most powerful, again, there's the P, men in their organization. We also can appreciate those who have a godly side, because that's where the prophetic comes in. When it comes to prediction, just think of it. What's the value of knowing what's going to happen ahead of time? As especially equates to those in Las Vegas. Again, we believe in the integrity of the games. But that's not to say this number cannot be used. It should be used to help coaches make their best basic strategy decisions. And then lastly, as regards to the media, they're very inaccurate in their predictions. So when you see a fantasy football program, let's say, this information that I'm blessed and pleased to offer can be very insightful to those of you who have an interest in fantasy sports. So again, I'm going to cover basically, even though there's just two teams remaining, Carolina and Denver, in this 50th Super Bowl, I'm going to cover a lot of things in this 30-minute message and just ask you to spread the word. And again, try to cover it across those three perspectives, the analytical from a basic strategy coaching point of view, and then, or even integrated into that, Las Vegas, and then even sorry, it's the end of the season, even incorporate into that, how's that, fantasy. So again, I'll give this message and then a message to close the season. So let's go over last week's games and then look forward to this week's games, or this week's, not this week, I'm sorry, February 7th game, the Super Bowl. And again, I apologize, it's the end of a long year. I think I may have missed one message by somehow technical error this season. And I believe you will hear the most accurate predictions, production, insights, and definitely prophecy you'll certainly hear in all the media. For example, last week I heard, even with just 4 teams remaining of the games, most of the media projected, as the public probably did because they were favorites, New England and Carolina. That's not the final matchup. Then I heard a lot of people say New England and Arizona. That's not the final matchup. The final matchup is Denver and Carolina, and few said that. And I will be honest, I did not believe it would be Denver and Carolina. I thought it would be Denver and Arizona, but I will say, and this is from a Las Vegas perspective, you can appreciate this, after the first game in which the listed power spread underdog, Denver, won, in the conference finals, there's usually the formula that you'll see. It's one underdog and one favorite. And even though I stand by the data, Carolina, for a second week in a row, as they were the week before, was actually what I call an underdog favorite. They gave 3 points at home. They're actually not the better team. And you could have seen me write somewhere on Twitter or Facebook that I really wholeheartedly believed after Denver, who was, even though it wasn't a clear-cut prediction, because this is one of the closest seasons on record, that once that Denver won, which I basically had leaned to, I then started to say, well, you might want to think about Arizona, and the only way Carolina, the only way Carolina can win is via the turnover, and they got a lot of them against Arizona. Not to say Arizona, that wasn't a 50-50 game, or Arizona wouldn't win more times, or Carolina couldn't win again, but honestly, the biggest difference in that game, and we'll get to that game after the Denver game here, but it was just basically Carson Palmer, who I believe is one of the most accurate passers in the NFL. I thought he'd be a great pick for any team after Oakland that got him. He just wasn't a good fit in Oakland, but his finger, obviously, there's a problem there, and he was very inaccurate again, as he was the week before, and quarterback by NFL ESP standards is actually about 37.5% of a team's offense. They comprise, we have them power rated from a 0 to 9 scale, and most NFL games actually end up being a 45-point total or 24 to 21, so 9 into 24 for a winning team, and usually you're going to have a winning quarterback, is 37.5%. So, and Carson is very highly ranked. His counterpart in that game, Cam Newton, is very highly ranked, and we were able to, prophesy and encourage Carolina to select him early, when in the draft as the first pick, when there was a lot of controversy, and he's really come to maturation and shown his ability. So, that was a godly selection. I know he's a good man of God. Actually, I see the best shot of any start of any game is before he takes the first snap, watch Cam Newton. He'll say a prayer, and he'll just start the whole game that way behind the center, and that's just a beautiful thing to see. I know he felt blessed that he got over his car accident, didn't lose his life, and you can see his zeal and zest for the game. Now, I will say this. I can appreciate, because I know he's a man of God, his exuberance and some people will think it's over the top or showboaty. But he does, he makes a beautiful gesture of giving the ball to the fans. But just always remember this from a spiritual perspective. Remember, NFL ESP covers spiritual. God always humbles us. He never fails to humble us. He's a God. He loves humility. He loves being humble, but he also loves confidence, and he also loves, in a way, preaching out, letting your light shine. Cam does that in one way, and if God ever feels he's being being a showboat or doing it in some, negatively prideful and not a positively prideful way, and not in a form of leadership or glorifying God, then God will be sure to humble him, and I'll have more on that later. Also, as I said with that game, and you'll find this actually in the format, and again, I projected this many years ago, is typically in the end, when you see 32 teams, you're going to have the NFC team against the AFC team, and then typically what you'll normally have, because the quarterback is the team leader, he's the most productive player on any football team, for the most part, is you're going to have one traditional drop-back quarterback, the best in the league, if you will, that season, against a running style quarterback, or a quarterback who can do both. Cam is obviously in the running style. Then you've got Peyton Manning for Denver, who's more in the traditional style. And then you actually had, let's say, three traditional drop-back quarterbacks, two weapon to face each other, Brady and Manning, and then, and Carson Palmer, traditional drop-back against Cam. So when I had realized the quarterback, permutations there, simple math will tell you, well, the one running quarterback is going to be the guy to get in. And so again, I know I wasn't totally accurate about last week, but I did say this, and I will still stand by this. Carolina is the most overrated, from a power spread perspective, one-win team in NFL history I can probably imagine. And I think, and then I'll get to the Super Bowl projection after we get, I do a little bit more analysis of the previous games. I'm going to give you a profound prediction, let's say, on the Super Bowl. So before I do that, let's go to the last game as well, in the AFC, which was Manning and the Broncos against Tom Brady and the Patriots. That was actually a very close game. If you look at it statistically, New England actually basically performed them, Denver, statistically. If you look at the stats and from some of the data that we use, in total yardage, New England almost gained 100 more total yards. It was obviously the two turnovers, the picks by Brady, which again are team picks. They're never just a player pick. It's always a team, and it could be attributed to Denver having the best defense ranked in the AFC. And again, that was as close a game as we projected it would be. I surely thought Arizona and Carolina would be much closer, but again, in the situation that it was, I give Carolina the credit, and to those who have had Carolina so far, but I think you're going to see a real blowback come the Super Bowl, and I'll get to that. So having said that, let me give you a little bit of insight on, some of the past history of these teams, and then, share this in regards to a Las Vegas perspective. All season long, and this will help you for those of you with a Las Vegas perspective, all season long, basically their version of the spread, which they get from us, okay, then they'll skew it and they'll alter it, actually was 2.5 points, either way. Most of the time, it was the AFC favored by 2.5. And as we had projected, the best teams, the highly power-ranked teams, are all in the AFC, basically the top 4 or 5. And I think you saw that, as we projected early on throughout the season, Denver, New England, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and then, we actually thought Indianapolis and Houston would do better. Baltimore, we know, tanked. But all those teams are basically, and we knew the Jets would do much better. And I'll make a quick note here on the Jets when we talk about MVP, because I was blessed to be able to submit something to the Jets this weekend. When we call out an MVP, we call it a most valuable producer, meaning of that, let's say, 1 to 9 point power spread scale, which quarterback is more, not in a sense, most valuable, because oftentimes the MVP award is the most outstanding player. As again, the errant media, again, 90% of them are inaccurate. The fans definitely, God bless them, they're off. And even a lot of the coaches are. Although I do respect them, they have jobs, they're working hard, they know much of their business. But let's say just 50% of all that they could know. But having said that, MVP, from our one scale, most valuable producer, we actually had two people in mind. Actually, quarterbacks, Tony Romo, believe it or not, who got injured, and if he were not injured, I believe Dallas would have won that division, got them in the playoffs instead of being in the cellar in that, in their division. And then the other one might well have been Ryan Fitzpatrick. Geno Smith, we noted before the year, was one of our lowest-ranked starting quarterbacks, in 10 years. And just the switch to Ryan Patrick got the Jets to just basically, a 10-6 record, a dramatic improvement from last season, and basically one win shy of getting in the playoffs. So that's how valuable Ryan Fitzpatrick was to that team. Now, from the typical perspective, how you might think of a player, a most valuable player, I certainly give all the credit to Cam Newton. I can surely see him, without him, Carolina, they have a stout defense. I give them points for that, in a sense, quote-unquote points for that. But Cam Newton definitely is a very valuable producer for his team. He's, an unbelievably dynamic, productive quarterback. And has many of the attributes you want as a quarterback, or at least leading your team. So, certainly, and you're going to hear me say this all season long, I've said that Carolina is overrated. Carolina is overrated, and I still believe that. But now it's finally, through some spiritual force or mathematical law I can't quite identify, I'm not a scientist per se, but now it's finally built up against Carolina that they have an overrated 15-1 record, and what you have to realize is, before I give my Super Bowl, let's say, prediction, the point I was trying to make is, even from a Vegas perspective, they had the, no more than a 2.5-point spread either way. In most cases, the NFC being the underdog, and now Carolina has emerged as the best team in the NFC. Although I wholeheartedly believe, from the power rating perspective, if you played that game more times than not, Arizona, Seattle, or Minnesota could have beaten Carolina. But now you see this bloated, I believe, because of the record, because of the blowout win against Arizona, a 5 or even a 5.5-point spread, Vegas's version of the spread, Carolina favoritism. Even before, just 2 weeks or a week before that game even began, before the Carolina blowout, again, that spread was the NFC getting 2.5 points. Now you have to give. No NFL team basically improves one touchdown over the other. And let me say this clearly. We still have Denver as the highest power-ranked team in the AFC, along with New England. And that was about a 50-50 game, New England and Denver. And again, in most cases, it would go either way. From a spiritual perspective, I definitely give Denver more points. I read a wonderful article how they got a preacher or minister in there to counsel the players. I don't know Coach Kubiak personally, but I did think that was a coaching improvement from Coach Fox. I believe Coach Fox might have had an epiphany. I never heard him be a godly man, but I think he had some health scare in the middle of the season last year for Denver. But I just thought that's a better upgrade spiritually for Denver to Coach Kubiak. I know he came from the Ravens, who are probably the most Christian team in all the NFL. I know many of the Ravens staff and respect their owner, Mr. Bisciotti, very well. And as some of you might have known, I've worked many years with Coach Trestman, and I know where his faith is. I won't discuss it. But anyway, having said that, I give Denver, points for that in a sense, to use an expression, because one of the least spiritual teams, I don't know all the players, and more of the players are Christians and believers and have faith in coaching staffs and owners, but New England is not necessarily a very, spiritually minded team. I don't believe Tom Brady is. I don't believe Coach Belichick is. I respect them. I mean, they work hard. They're talented mentally. And from a football perspective, eternally, it's a different story. But anyway, having said that, without getting too deep into that, again, from a power rating perspective, Carolina, I would still rank 8th or maybe 7th or 6th. And I can just go back to this season and tell you, if just by one of the indicators that I review, Carolina's basically played 6 playoff teams this season. Okay, 5 were in the NFC. They basically beat all the NFC playoff teams. They beat Seattle, Green Bay, Seattle twice, or played. No, I don't want to say beat. They did beat Seattle twice. They beat Green Bay. They beat Washington, who's very low rated, and then Arizona, in that game. The only AFC team they played that was playoff worthy was the lowest rated of all the AFC playoff teams, and that was evident in their game against Kansas City, was Houston. Okay, now is their real test, Carolina, how they do against an AFC team. And even in some of the games, when I look at Carolina, knowing that the reason their best asset, even above Cam Newton, is their defense and their ability to get turnovers. Either Cam not turning the ball over, or the offense and running game, or receivers, catching the ball and no tip balls for interceptions or whatnot. But they had, by our NFL ESP standard, 109 points, which is by far the best. The only few teams I've seen over 100 in the last decade was Seattle, when they won the Super Bowl, which comes to mind. But it's very, to get over 100 NFL ESP turnover points is amazing. But again, the only team that they played in the AFC was Houston. Now, contrarily, you look at a team like Denver. Denver's only plus 11 in turnovers, okay? But in their power-ranked schedule, they've played 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 playoff teams. 9. And in the 2 against the NFC, they beat them both, Minnesota and Green Bay, two teams I rank more highly than Carolina. And in the AFC, they beat Kansas City. Okay, they split with Kansas City. They beat New England twice now, who is the defending champions for a reason. They lost to Pittsburgh, and they beat Cincinnati. Actually, they split with Pittsburgh, and they beat Cincinnati. So, the AFC is truly more highly power-ranked than the NFC by far, in fact. And Carolina, not only did I mention the teams that they played to you, but the reason that they have this bloated 15 or 17, whatever, one record, whatever, how many wins they have now, might be 16-1, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly, is that they played the 2 weakest divisions in all of the NFL, and that was the NFC East and their own NFC South. So there was sort of this vacuum created. Like, it's to say, when you're a certain number of points better than all your other teams in those 2 divisions, you're going to end up winning games by, X number of points, and you're going to have an inflated record. But if you put yourself up against the AFC, what is your record if your schedule happened to be balanced, if you're playing different divisions? Now, I predicted the one loss that Carolina had against Atlanta. You can go back to, December 27th when they played. You can listen to the program. And again, I've been saying all season long, Carolina is overrated. And now, finally, I think you're going to see that when it comes to the Super Bowl. So let me tell you a couple more thoughts, okay, before I spend the last 5 minutes, basically just giving you a total breakdown on the Super Bowl, which you can use in Las Vegas. Actually, last week in fantasy, to give you a little fantasy perspective, I was pretty accurate. I did make some mistakes with the Carolina defense, and I admit this season, while I believe I gave you some strong insights on fantasy, I'm still not perfect enough in the way to apply NFL ESP to fantasy. But I will get there. This was the first full year I actually studied fantasy, did well, profited in a sense. Financially, that's not my main motivation. I'm encouraged that people, are blessed by that. That if they listen to NFL Moneyball, they'll profit more than anybody you'll hear, especially Matthew Berry on ESPN, who's the quote-unquote, and I hate to even use the word expert, I won't even use it on myself, and I talk to God. And these people bandy about that word, so capriciously, it's just, and inaccurately, it annoys me, to be honest with you. So I respect that he has a job. I respect that he, got in on the ground floor, that, fantasy has become as powerful as it is a force in, fans' interest in the game. I love playing it, actually. It's fun for me. I can appreciate it. It takes a lot of study, professionalism, if you really want to be, good at it. But I also know that, I will be blessed to get there at some point. God and I, he's already there, God. It's me catching up to him. But anyway, so from a fantasy perspective, I thought there might be snow in the Carolina-Arizona game, and when there's snow, the games tend to go over. If there's wind, the games tend to go under, but it turned out being a nice day, and still that game went over. But you had to have Carolina's defense in order to win fantasy last week. I didn't. I went with Arizona's defense. But easily should have switched that. I actually had clicked Carolina to begin with and got off of it. Cam Newton obviously did well at quarterback. He was my first quarterback, and then I switched off him. I just tried to stay consistent with Arizona because I said to myself again, as I relayed to you, if Arizona didn't win last week, then this AFC team would beat Carolina this week. That Carolina can't win, the divisional, the conference, and the Super Bowl. They're just not power ranked, that highly. I give them credit for beating Seattle, and I give them credit for beating Arizona for sure. But any other given Sunday, as the expression says, I don't believe they would have. So with about 4 minutes left, let's get to the Super Bowl. Again, I'll try to blanket it through a Las Vegas perspective, NFL ESP, and, from fantasy. Carolina is, to me, the definitive underdog, and when you are the underdog, you tend to play have more motivation in your power quarters or your positive quarters, which are the first and third. You saw that clearly in the Carolina game at home against Seattle and Arizona. They came out on top. They played more strongly in the first quarter. I think you're going to see that in the Super Bowl as well. And then I think you're going to see Denver be more productive in the second and fourth quarters because I know they're the clear-cut power spread favorite. I know Carolina's going in there. Even though they're listed as favorite, I think they're going to know in their heart they're more the underdog. And I think, for however that works, it just works that way. I know everybody's predicting a low-scoring game, two tough defenses. They have a power spread. I don't want to tell you exactly what our power spread is, but from a Vegas perspective, the spread on the game is 45 points. To give you a little bit more breakdown, and on the total on the game itself, Carolina's 5.5. Again, that is one of the more or most inaccurate spreads, even back to perhaps Indy and New Orleans when Indy quote unquote, or New Orleans quote unquote upset Indy. We had Indy as a power spread underdog, and they were giving points. You had New Orleans as an underdog, which was, shouldn't have been. This is that type of game. Denver, if anybody should be giving points, Denver should be giving 5.5 to Carolina. So from a Vegas perspective, really, you can, I think, take advantage of that. Again, there's a lot of public, backing of Carolina. There's the media is already, I can hear them all talking about Carolina. They've got the Cam Newton publicity factor talking about Carolina. Surely I think Denver would have been more power spread rated with Brock Osweiler, but how's he going to get into the lineup? I think they'll go with Peyton till his dying day or his last game or his last play in the Super Bowl. He's not necessarily a detriment to Denver, but I think Denver would even do better with Brock Osweiler in there. I always power rated him all season higher with him in there, and I believe that's still the case. But having said that, I also think you're going to see Carolina start out scoring in the first and third, and then the game, I think you're going to see a total go over 45 points, just over. All right, and before I give you my most profound prediction, if you're Carolina, you really got to create turnovers, and you got to really put the ball in Cam Newton's hands. And you see this in championship games when you're sort of like a LeBron on the Cavs, or when Kobe was on fire with the Lakers, that they'll score. These players will score really high in the game because the players all know, they can just see from the ebb and flow of the game that they're better off just to have the ball in that player's hands, and he's their best player, and he kind of has to take control. So Cam is definitely by far Carolina's best offensive player, and he should run and throw. He shouldn't even hand off to running backs, to be honest with you, for the most part. I'm being a little, exaggerating that point, but he should really just be running and passing, just Cam. So what I think you're going to see here in closing is, I think you're going to see a game that's higher scoring than people think, and I'm going to project here, and I know I left a lot out of this program, but we're running out of time. I think you're going to see a prognostication that you're not going to hear, and which is the most probable to come out in the things that you don't hear, and what I think you're not hearing is a Denver blowout. I can see Denver winning something like, 35-14, the total being 49, and Denver winning, even more than that, perhaps something, like even more than that. But having said that, it's only because these turnovers are going to reverse. Maybe it's a couple fumbles you don't expect from Carolina, players that aren't Cam Newton, let's say, just tip balls. Cam isn't as accurate a quarterback as Peyton Manning. He does, he threw a pick against Patrick Peterson last week. So you might see something like that, and that would be my bold prediction if I have to make one. A Denver in a basic blowout. And this blowout from last week, that score could even be reversed, something like 42-14. I know it was 49-14, or whatever, 49 to whatever, Arizona had. But anyway, or 15. So anyway, having said that, I'm so sorry I ran out of time. I had so much more to say, but I want to thank you for listening. Be blessed. Enjoy the Super Bowl, and I just wish that the national anthem would be sung by somebody in a tuxedo and a nice dress and have some class, and that the whole thing and everybody not try to sell you beer and meat and cigarettes. So listen, God bless you. Thank you for listening. This is Mark Anthony DeBella, and you've been listening to NFL Moneyball. God bless.